back to the Washington Outsider Report on the Coalition Radio. For those newly joining the program, my name is Irina Zuckerman, and I am the editor-in-chief of the Washington Outsider. Today, we have a special guest from Poland. His name is Maciej Kożuszek, and he is the head of the international desk at the Polish publication Gazeta Polska, a Polish newspaper, and which is a weekly, and he's the author of Kożuszek Shafi, which is a YouTube channel. The reason he is joining us today is to discuss the breaking news and a very shocking development which took place yesterday, which was the Polish government's shutdown of its TVP station, which includes both domestic stations called TVP Info and largest English station in Eastern Europe, TVP English, TVP World. And full disclosure, I have been a frequent commentator on the TVP World, and I have also contributed an article there in the past. Not only has the stations been shut down, but the police actually came to the building to do so, and the content has also been taken down from the websites, and there's been quite a great deal of controversy, all of that. So Maciej, thank you so much for joining us today on such short notice. I'm sure there's a lot going on. So before we delve into what all this means, into the political context, into the media context, could you tell us a little bit your own background and your work?
Yeah, so as you said, I'm a head of the international desk at Gazeta Polska. That's a conservative weekly. I've been a journalist for a relatively short time, since 2016. I was a teacher before, I was doing some art before, but yeah, so I'm based in Poland, but I'm basically trying to relay international affairs, mainly USA politics, to the Polish viewers and my viewers on my YouTube channel. That's what I do. But I'm part of conservative media, so I comment also on Polish politics often. Although I think I'm also a commentator. I was commentator on TVP World before it was shut down, and usually I was in 95% of the time I wasn't commenting on Polish politics, but I was commenting on war in Ukraine, US politics, and stuff like that. So yeah, that's my basic background. I'm a major in philosophy, so I look always on politics from a little bit of a deeper perspective, and probably that explains to my viewers my approach to many events, and yeah, that's pretty it.
So I believe many of our viewers today are outside Poland, and they probably do not know anything either about the media or the political context of these events that have occurred. So just as a background, the elections were held in October. The previously ruling party has now been replaced by the new Prime Minister Tusk's party. Could you tell us a little bit about the difference between these two parties? Who were its leaders, and what were their platforms?
Yeah, so in general terms, I would say what we see in Poland is a finishing of an era in Polish politics that is been defined by the rivalry between Jarosław Kaczyński, who is a perennial leader of Law and Justice Party, the party that was ruling Poland for 8 years, and Donald Tusk, who is the leader of the Civic Platform Party, but also before he came back, he was the prime minister before he came back again to Polish politics, he was the head of the European Council. So it's for viewers in the US, it's the important deciding body in the European Union that consists of the leaders of all the nations. And well, the leader of Council was once to be named president of the European Union, but that didn't came to be. But that's the whole other story. But Tusk was serving for some time there. He came back to Poland, and what's the crux of the discussion and the politic differentiation? I would say, for example, US viewers and maybe European viewers would understand what happened in Poland in 2015 when Law and Justice won the election for the first time was in some ways similar to Trump winning in 2016 in US and to a Brexit vote in the UK. So there was a large swath of public that felt that their voice wasn't heard. And Law and Justice, although it's a really traditional party that was in Polish politics, unlike Trump, for example, in US politics, it was since the 90s a part of Polish politics, but it was outside of the mainstream, also outside of the media mainstream. The right-wing media were always amateurish because they didn't have the funding. And they always were, anti-establishment, we would say. So there was an establishment that was formed in Poland. And Tusk, when he was ruling from 2007 to 2015, and well, actually his party ruled 2015 because in 2014 he went away from Poland to serve a European function. He was, I think, certainly, and I think that would be fair to say that he was a representative of the establishment. One of the important issues was the European integration for Poland, which is, those, differentiation dimensions are quite similar among different countries. So, for example, people that are well-educated or have higher university degrees in United States, therefore migration, therefore different things that are connected to LGBT issues. They call themselves that they are more open. The people who are less educated are more conservative. And in Poland, it's similar. For example, people with less formal education are more traditional. They believe in the church to a larger extent. They view traditional values as a really important to their life. And they also feel that, well, in European Union, Poland wasn't treated fairly. So that was the main discussion. Also in Poland, there were many issues that rose from the post-communist times, right? When the power became democratic, we still have communist functionaries that are, for example, European parliamentarians, and right now they are the representatives of the democratic movement, and they are kind of whitewashed the past. But for example, for conservative voters and people that voted for Law and Justice Party, one of the most important issues for many years was something that was called lustration, or so checking the past of people that were part of the previous system. For example, were serving in different tasks in special services in communist countries. If people know the history of communist countries, the special services that were eavesdropping on people are doing all those things. So for right-wing voters or right-wing politicians, this was an issue that always divided Polish society. Some people were saying we have to just draw a line and say that is the past and we're not interested in that. Some people will say, well, yes, but those people from the past are actually doing quite a good business in the democratic era. So we need to there need to be some form of recognition. So that is the difference in Poland. And people after peace, so law and justice, peace we say in Polish, prawo I sprawiedliwość, which means law and justice. After peace won in 2015, there was also a large part of Polish society that felt that something that we won in 89, so the freedom and the occidentalization, so the Poland is becoming more and more Western, we becoming more and more similar to the Western democracies, especially European democracies, and as certain values are upheld by the state, that is under danger. So it became of a mental or identity for them to say we need to get Poland to normalcy again, right? And when Tusk won, and actually he didn't win technically the elections because Law and Justice had the highest rate of the vote, 35% of the vote, but they were able, Tusk Trzecia Droga, which is the third weight party, and the left in Poland, the three groups of parties were able to form a coalition that is the basis of the current government. So to sum it up, the divisions are cultural, the divisions are ideological, the divisions are also deeply political, and many, and I understand why they can be not fully understood on the outside of the Poland, yeah?
So one of the issues that to an outsider voter will seem very strange is that Poland has been doing quite well economically under law and justice in terms of foreign policy, and despite its differences with the European Union, it was becoming a very significant power as well. What was the nature of the debate that forced people to abandon the seemingly successful status quo and go back to, let's say, an alternative? What was Tusk offering that law and justice was not?
Well, it's a really hard question, although it seems simple, because yes, the economy was doing good. The geopolitical shift are also at the same time dangerous for Poland because the war is really close to our borders. But at the same time, if you look at the role that Poland played in Ukraine's war, for example, in terms of logistical, being the logistical hub for military aid for Ukraine and the likes, yes, Poland significance has risen, right? But for people that were against Law and Justice Party and the Law and Justice, they felt that Poland is sliding, that's their language that they use, and that the Poland is sliding towards authoritarianism, right? To some form of undemocracy. But the thing that they were criticizing mostly is not the fact that it's not a democracy, because peace, law and justice was winning the elections, but they were, for example, criticizing the reform of the judiciary in Poland, which was a super important thing. And it wasn't done after Poland came out of the communism in a proper way. And I think you can still criticize the way that Law and Justice tried to do that. And the other thing was, you know, people in USA know something that's called Trump derangement syndrome. We all know President Donald Trump. He has his peculiarities, and some of them are really dangerous. But there is also a large swath, I think, of a narrative about him, especially from 2016, that was just people projecting their fears about what will happen with this. People were also saying that America will become a dictatorship and stuff like that. So many parts of the narrative aren't about, well, this will be the reforms I'm trying to answer your question as well as I can. This will be the reforms that Tusk will make economy run better, or this will be reforms that will make judiciary function better. But we don't want those people to rule our country, because they are not like us. We feel like, so for example, just to give you one symbolic and cultural example, Tusk, before the election, had this huge rally in Warsaw. They call it the March of the Million. I don't know if the attendance was 1 million, but it's always a discussion in Poland what the real attendance. But there were hundreds of thousands of people. And in the culminated moment of that march, there were artists and every known actor in Poland, every person that is a known TV director or theater director was standing behind Tusk on the stage and singing "We love our freedom." There's a Polish song that's called "Wolność, kocham i rozumiem." I respect my freedom and I understand my freedom. The lyrics go. So for many people, I think that's my opinion. For many people that were voting for either of those three parties, they were feeling like the elites of Poland were mistreated, and not everybody is a part of the elite, but there are many people who feel like they have a mental and spiritual connection with the elites, like the actors and the celebrities, and they felt like culturally we have to go back to this elite ruling style of politics. I think that was one of the main issues and reasons.
So here's a question for you. I can see that it sort of was a surge and a counter surge, almost in politics. And I'm trying to understand the dimension. What has brought law and justice? What made them succeed despite these obvious cultural divisions back in 2015? And what made them fail? Why have they not been able to recapture part of the public that they needed to clench enough votes to be able to form the coalition?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the second part of this question is the hardest. And I'm one of the people that try to, on the conservative side of the Polish media and public debate, I'm trying to stress the fact that we cannot just focus on fighting all the time. Like, like the Trump supporters always say, well, this is a good politician because he fights, he doesn't give crap.
Mhm.
But we also have to think what we did wrong or what some people did wrong, right? So let's start with the first part. Maybe that would be easier. And it's, to some extent, it's similar to the phenomenon of Donald Trump, I think. So the elites that control the media feel like they have all the solutions, right? And the problem is that people are feeling unheard. For example, there is a large difference on how, for example, in Western countries, people from the lower ranks of society, unskilled labor, are feeling about immigration because the immigrants are actually the ones that are their competition for the work, and they're putting pressure on the pay, right? And the elites would always say to them, well, it's because you are xenophobes, because you are racist, because you are so there was this, in Poland we call it the pedagogy of humiliation. So you always would be humiliated. You believe in the God because you're living in an anachronistic way. So the media before 2015 were weak, but they were addressing this important, I think, feeling in Poles that they are unheard. And also, there was one crucial identitarian event that is today not talked enough, probably. In 2010, Polish president and the brother of Jarosław Kaczyński, Lech Kaczyński, and 25 other people have died in Smolensk in an airplane crash, going to celebrate the in memory of Polish officers that were slaughtered during the executed 12,000 by the shot in the head by the Soviet Union, right? And they died. And there was whole thing about investigation. And Tusk was a prime minister back then. And a lot of people with Jarosław Kaczyński at the top felt that he cooperated with the Russians. There were some more serious accusations at Tusk, but Poles felt like there is a large part of Polish society, I think, still, that looks at politics through the perspective of history. And being a victim of Russian aggression, being a victim of Russian subterfuge is a big part of that history, right? And there is a poet, a famous poet, Jarosław Marek Rymkiewicz, Polish, and he, after the Smolensk crash in 2010, he wrote a poem that ended with the word, "What has been divided will never be glued together." So on one side, you had people who felt Russia did dirty play on our president and maybe killed our president. On the other side, you said there were people, well, we did an investigation. It was a mistake of the pilots. And even some of them blamed Lech Kaczyński, the president himself. And so this is you have to appreciate the depth. There were people on the plane that were known in Polish public life, politicians and others who were remembered for many, many years. And Donald Tusk, for many, was the symbol of that. So that is another layer of the divisions, right? So there are some things that are quite similar to Western divisions between, let's say, the populist right and the elitist left liberal. So there are many things that are similar, but there are many things that are just understood by somebody who's deeply rooted in Polish history and political history also.
My understanding from reading recent articles in the Polish press is that one of the accusations levied against Tusk's government, if not himself personally, is that during his time in office, his intelligence services met with their Russian counterparts over 100 times, which goes far beyond necessary and inevitable meetings for neighboring countries, given the fraught history and especially in the years of Putin in the Kremlin. Is there any significance to that story, or is it a bit of an exaggeration that perhaps does not bear any great scrutiny?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that it needs scrutiny. Actually, many of the people that were taking part in the process that you described, so there were meetings with alcohol, with FSB officials, and SKW is the military counterintelligence service in Poland. And from 2010 and following those years, the cooperation, and even there were proposals signed that we will exchange information with FSB, right? So, I mean, even if you don't know the context of Polish politics and Polish history, in those days, when you talk about cooperation with Russians on this level, it is hard to imagine, right? It is hard to imagine. But you have to remember it was happening in the years where even the United States was trying to follow a recent pattern. Gerhard Schroeder in Germany wasn't completely, discredited as he is probably today. Nord Stream 2, Nord Stream 1, Nord Stream 2 was in the making. Nord Stream 2 was pumping gas. And the defense of Tusk in this situation would be to say that he was just trying to adjust to the way the world politics were happening back then and win something for Poland. But the problem is, obvious for me as a conservative, and I think the one thing that the right-wing media were always right in Polish discussion is Russia. Because we always said, well, you cannot believe there is a reset in Russia, that there is a liberalization in Russia. They will come back and they will be the same as they always were in history. And that turned to be true. But okay, so he might have made mistakes. The radical interpretation of that is that there were some deep ties. And the interesting fact is that when they took over TVP, just yesterday, of course, it will be, when our viewers are watching this, it will be a couple of days from now. But yesterday they took, when we are talking to the TVP, they also took control, the new government took control of the VOD, so video on demand service that TVP had. And one of the things that was on this service, and the first thing that they erased from the service was, I think, 8-part, I might be mistaken, 6 or 8-part documentary that was called Reset. And it was a documentary done by Michał Rachoń and Sławomir Cęckiewicz, one journalist and a historian from Poland, that was describing the dealings of special services and Polish intelligence during Tusk government with Russian counterparts and the exchange of information and everything that was dangerous in it, right? So maybe that's a provocation. They want to provoke the opponents to just go through conspiracy theories, but that's just a sign of times. That was the first thing that they erased from the servers, was this documentary that they really felt. And if you look at nominations in counterintelligence, military counterintelligence right now, many generals that were, I think, discredited for their working with Russia, for their, there are Polish generals that have famously visited Moscow and published on the internet photos of themselves in a Russian, how you call that, Navy Navy man, like a hat with in Cyrillic saying Aurora, important, of course, Aurora, the important battleship during the Bolshevik Revolution. So the relationship was really close, and the fact that there are in 2023 those people, because I would be okay if they said, well, we thought there is a reset all over the West, so we wanted to be part of that, but why are you bringing back the people who are the proprietors of that reset 10 years ago or so? So that is the thing that really worries me, right? And especially in a geopolitical surrounding that we are having now.
Now, as an outside observer, looking at the scene and without knowing some of these details that you're now telling me, I observed three interesting things that were happening with Poland prior to leading up to the elections and soon after. First, there's been a consistent efforts by the Russian intelligence to infiltrate Poland. It has not stopped, and many of these operations have been successfully dismantled. But the fact is, there has been a continuing counterintelligence threat to Poland. Second, some of the individuals affiliated with Tusk's party, I will not name him personally because I have no evidence, they have embraced language in some of the documents coming out of Senate that were exceptionally provocative and probably somewhat misleading. And I'm talking about some of the language about the Pegasus software and other sorts of things, accusing the government of illegal espionage against the surveillance of the opposition, the illegal purchase of that tool from Israel, and so forth. The language was far beyond what you would normally expect from, somewhat critical opposition-based committee. The third issue was that Tusk positioned himself as being pro-Ukraine, both before, during his campaign, and in the days right after. But the question is, I have for myself trying to reconcile these three observations, is that can Tusk live up to his promises of being pro-Ukraine? And I'm not questioning his motives, nor have I seen anything to contradict his actions thus far early in his tenure, given that there has been a very clear evidence of extreme level of bias on an institutional level in his party, which quite frankly fed into a lot of the Russian-based information campaigns, and that was the subject of the article that I had published with TVP, and really fed into their desire to discredit surveillance tools that were a problem for these very spies that were being caught. And can he deal with this? Can these intelligence officers deal with the outside problems from stemming from Russian efforts to infiltrate the society that Law and Justice prided themselves on?
Yeah, those are great questions. If you look at the narrative about special services and counterintelligence in Poland, that is served on the previous opposition side, because we were sorry for that, because we as journalists, they were opposition for 8 years and it kind of stuck to them, but they are government right now, right? Tusk and the likes. So they were, for example, yes, as you said, they were talking about Pegasus, but it was really abstract, in my opinion. I'm not an expert when it comes to counterintelligence and any kind of intelligence, but they were, for example, saying that there's a dictatorship, they're trying to eavesdrop on but there were no real evidence based articles, right? There were also it's interesting when you look at Russian propaganda. For example, Tusk and his allies were saying, well, actually, if you look at peace, because they want to be authoritarian and they want to be dictatorial, it would fit in their narrative that they're pro-Putin, which was, well, if you look at the amount of, even Poland, I think right now is one of the few countries that didn't advertise the full support for Ukraine because they were afraid for example, for Russia not to know how many tanks we have given to Ukrainians, right? So it's the complete opposite of the German approach, who they will always sum everything, even things that are just in the plan 6 months from now, right? Or so. And many of those, but that's one thing. And so, but you know, they try to stick the pro-Russian name on Law and Justice, which was, I think, was one of the most unfair things that happened. So can you stick the same name? And some of the people on the right will try to do that. Can you stick the same name on Tusk? I don't know. I think that they were incompetent in many ways when they were ruling, because they had this vision that the world is safe. You know, the world is safe because Poland is part of European Union and Poland is part of NATO. And apart from that, we can maybe make some deals with Russia that will be beneficial to everybody, right? So that is the part of incompetence. What those people will do, I really worry, because, you know, Polish, for example, military counterintelligence, unlike the special civilian service that was eavesdropping on and, you know, invigilating common citizens during the communist times, that was shut down and started again. The military intelligence was just basically came from the communist times unchanged, and it was called WSI or WSI, the military information services, and it was closed in 2005, I think, by first Law and Justice government, right? And when it was closing, the narrative back then by all the media experts, and many of them post-communist background and communist skill training in the past, right? So they were saying, well, you are getting rid of best officers, of the best experts, and Poland will be left defenseless. The problem with that is that throughout its working, the WSI, so the Military Informational Service, didn't manage, from 1989 to 2005, didn't manage to find one Russian operator in Poland. Not one. They didn't find any probes of Russian influence, Russian paid actors, you know, all those different categories that we have in intelligence service. So something was wrong with that, you would say, right? And the way that, as I'm saying, I'm not an expert in it, but when during the recent years, when there was talk about changing the special services, the intelligence services in Poland, many of the experts that came to say that peace and law and justice is putting Poland in danger were those people that were experts in those years. They were and connected to that world. So yes, so as you know, in every country, every bureaucracy has factions also, right? And this is one faction, and I don't. So my worry, not as a person that wants to put anybody in jail. I just worry if my country, in this dangerous geopolitical situation with Russia, without a doubt, trying to influence Polish politics and stuff like that, and running operations here. I just want to know that Poland will be safe, and I worry that those people that are well connected in the ruling parties right now are not the ones to do that job, and that is a worrisome signal.
By the same token, there's a lot of concern. There has been a lot of concern from the pro-Ukraine Ukraine supporters in the West that Law and Justice, in its last months leading up to the election, were playing a very populist card towards the farmers and disputes over grain imports and so forth, and also about weapons. Although I haven't seen a change in policy on weapons from Tusk's government so far either, which leads me to believe that it was a non-issue. They were claiming that some of the comments coming out were endangering relationship with Ukraine and support for Ukraine, and were basically cheap shots, and that have created a situation where now you have farmers trying to block borders, and that And these Ukraine supporters praised Tusk for opening the borders between Poland and Ukraine. Can you comment on this context before we moving into more general issue of populism, accusations, and
Yeah,
TVP and the media environment?
yeah, sure. This is a fraud issue because, you know, I would say many people don't talk about it like this, but if the timing of, sorry for talking in so pragmatic terms about warfare, which is a brutal, and as you know, I've been part of media report for many months since the start of the invasion, so I was always pro-Ukrainian, and even I had many people said that maybe I think that Ukrainian national interests are more important. Accusations against me were made, but you have to say there are differences in national interest. For example, Polish right was at some point thinking about alliance with the National Front in France, but the French nationalists were the ones that were saying, we don't want Polish plumbers in a street to compete with our own plumbers. So they hated Poles, right, back then. So it's in some ways similar, because right now Polish transport firms which have lower rates and are winning competitive markets in European Union, because as Poland is part of the European Union, are feeling that some of the advantages that Ukrainian drivers and logistics companies have gained are threatening them, right? And of course, in Poland, there are many voices that say it's true, but also there is a war going on. Keeping Ukrainian economy afloat is really important. But that had also an electoral effect, because PiS was afraid that it will lose the more far to the right voters who, for example, there is also another right-wing party in Poland. It's called Konfederacja. It's more, when it comes to economy, it's more libertarian, it's more nationalistic. It's, for example, one of the older of the world saw Grzegorz Braun, who is the member of the parliament from Konfederacja, who was running with the extinguisher in Polish parliament, right, trying to extinguish Hanukkah of so it was a huge scandal. So Grzegorz Braun, one of these, during the election, he had this slogan. He was saying stop the Ukrainization of Poland. So they were treating Ukrainians as a threat. And large majority of PiS law and justice voters didn't have a problem with Ukrainians, but some of the leaders in PiS were afraid that some of the voters will leak to Konfederacja. So that's normal electoral calculations. And if you add to the fact that I think that's my external opinion, President Zelensky was also under a huge political pressure internationally and maybe to some point internally. So the road has the interests were divided between Poland and Ukraine, right? So for Zelensky, there was a priority to have the grain being transported through Poland, and Polish politicians were trying to assuage their own electorate, right? And that is, so the thing that I wanted to start with was that if the timing of the election was different, if the war was going better, because there was a point where Zelensky came to Poland and he was hugging with President Duda, and it was like the law and justice government, and with president who's from the same political formation, they were the heroes of that situation, because they were the best, the most rugged, the strongest friends of Ukraine. And even when other countries were a little bit on the fence, and that really changed. And I think that also had some effect on the election in Poland, because because we had a conflict with European Union from the 2016, Tusk and the likes were saying, look what Law and Justice did. We are criticized in the Brussels, we are criticized in the Washington, and even Ukraine is saying there's something wrong with Law and Justice. So I think that was also important.
So interestingly enough, for all Tusk's criticism of law and justice very populist, some of his criticism to me seem in themselves be distinctly populist. They hold a particular brand of populist appeal. They're not necessarily, strictly speaking,
Yeah.
entirely fact-based. But let's move to what is factual-based, which is the nature of the media and judiciary reform that he promised upon taking office, before we delve into the details of media environment and their actual impact on what is going on. First, it's important to understand what was the platform of these reforms that he stated and that he announced to the country.
So what do you mean by his platform? What were his promises?
Yes, what were his promises before, and what is his actual the legal path that he's pursuing them? What is he trying to accomplish?
Yeah, so let's start with, because I think TV is the most heated discussion right now, and the courts and the judicial system is crucial for Poland, and I think it was one of the huge mistakes of the Law and Justice, because they didn't plan it good, and didn't finish it, which I think is even worse. If you start a reform and you leave a uncertain situation at the end, right? But let's start with TV. So all those two things are somewhat connected, because so Law and Justice, when they took power in 2015, I think it would be fair to say they felt that it will be huge pressure on them from different places to take the power away, right? So one of the priorities was to take control of the one media that they could take control in Poland, which was the public media. And they legislated a legislation that said a new body was constituted. It's called Rada Mediów Narodowych, which is called the Council of the National Media. And this council was given the right to choose the CEO of public television, CEO of or president, however you want to call it, of public radio, and CEO of Polish information agency, which is called PAP, which is like Reuters or something like that, right? So, and then, of course, throughout the 8 years, I think it's fair, especially TVP and especially TVP Info, which is like a CNN or whatever you can call it, a 24-hour news channel about politics mainly. So it became more and more pro-law justice. The journalists were pro-law justice. They were defending the party. They were defending the government and the like. And the voters and the cultural elites that were supporting Donald Tusk and other parties were saying one of the first things we have to do is take care of the public media. Because, you know, nobody, that was the whole plan of the right in Poland. Yes, all other media in Poland, big television stations, big internet, web pages and the like, were liberal left, right? So TVP was creating a real pluralist media landscape. Like TVP played a role that Fox News, for example, plays in the US, right? The problem to justify that is that TVP, as its name says, is public media, right? It's like BBC. Many post-communist countries still have public media. US doesn't have that. Or you have PBS, but that's just a completely different structure. The state doesn't run the PBS, as far as I understand. So people were saying public media cannot be only for one party, right? And the other side was saying, well, maybe, but nobody is for us and nobody is for electorate, right? And just to go forward a little bit, that will be a problem, because we will have 35% of Polish voters voted for Law and Justice. And when TVP is taken away, they won't have a TV station, they won't have a big radio station, they won't have a big... For example, I work for a private right-wing television station, but it's quite small. You know, the reach is quite small. So, just to not to talk too long about it, but Tusk said, yes, we will take care of that. But the problem is, to take care of that lawfully, he would have to either change the Council of National Media, which was possible, or he would have to change the law, because the law states that the prerogative to change the TVP is in the hands of the Council of National Media. What they did was unlawful, I think, clearly, because even people that always criticize TVP for being too right-wing, too one-sided, were saying this wasn't done lawfully. They decided for a Minister of Culture to one day say all the CEOs of TVP, PAP, Polish Radio are fired, and we are naming new ones, right? But he doesn't have that right. And practical way in which it was conducted, I think, is even more worrisome to many Poles, because what they did, they didn't legislate anything in terms of the law. They just had a resolution which was really abstract, saying, let's return to the state where law is respected and constitution is respected and media are pluralistic, right? But what that means in reality, nobody knows. So what they did, they created this quasi new powers that will run TVP. But the reality, what they did, they cut the signal of TVP info by a way of, I would say, coup or subterfuge. That was because the Minister of Culture actually was a colonel before, a colonel in the UOP, which was the special service that was created after the communist special service was liquidated. So many people are saying there is no surprise that he kind of conducted this subterfuge action. So they basically had somebody on the internal workings of a TVP who pushed the button and turned off TVP info. They turned off also, which was surprising to many commentators all around the world, they turned off TVP World, which was TV that was really appreciated all around the world. I was a commentator there. But many people in Poland, I think, because probably they don't speak English or whatever, but they didn't know of the existence and the large reach that TVP World had. But the strange thing was that, just to finish the point, Poles didn't get any explanation. I was just talking to some journalists. I disagree with them in many things that were working either TVP World or TVP Info or those stations. And they said, nobody told us what's happening. Nobody told us who is ruling the TV station right now. Nobody told us if our program, some people got calls, for example, well, your program is no longer gonna be broadcast. I was talking to people in TVP World. Nobody told them why TVP World, because nobody had any accusations, for example, that no one presented any accusations that TVP World was biased or one-sided, because and people like Sergei Sumlenny and other commentators that were part of, they were just outside commentators in TVP World were saying, I never was talking about Polish politics. I never was saying Law and Justice is the best party in the world or anything. And I wasn't saying that in TVP World also. So people were really surprised with that. And in the end, you had an image, like, sorry for saying that, and I'm saying sorry mainly to the Poles. We had an image like from a banana republic, because on 7:30 p.m. every day, Poles know that in TVP1 there are news, right? This is the main news program that is, cultish in Polish psyche. And nobody knew what was going to happen. A previous information program weren't broadcasted. And on 7:30 p.m., a journalist that wasn't working previously in TVP, but he's known, some people know him, just stood before the camera for 1 minute and 30, wasn't described in any way. What is his function? What is he doing? And he was saying, well, we'll make TVP working better. And it's not going to be a soup, it's going to be a clear water. We'll give you facts, not opinions, stuff like that. And it took 1 minute and 30 seconds and he just went off, right? So, I don't know, our viewers are from probably different countries, but if we would see something like that in your country, whatever your ideology is, if you don't know what's happening and a strange guy comes to the biggest TV stations and says, well, there will be changes, we will inform you what will happen, you will think, well, it's like a banana republic, right? That's the, yeah.
But in the United States, of course, when a new party comes to power, they certainly replace the heads of various public organizations, and of course, there are media outlets that are broadcast in the U.S. to the outside world, Voice of America, and so forth. But I have yet to see a single instance where the police would get involved in that transition from one power to another, and I'm not entirely sure why that was necessary, even if there's justification to say that the station was excessively biased and needs a recalibration. So I'd like to ask you the following. The historian Anne Applebaum, who is the wife of the current foreign minister, who, by the way, has been in the past accused of corruption by Law and Justice, and other people claim that this is all, again, populism. She stated that TVP has been turned into a vicious propaganda, and that it will be returned on air once the functionaries of the previous parties are removed. And by that, it sounds like she's talking about all the anchors and journalists, because the administration has already been fired. Her comments and this general perception was also reflected in international coverage of the event, particularly BBC and various European outlets. On the other hand, the critics of the way this was done are questioning, first of all, the involvement of law enforcement and the optics of it, and the fact that the content was taken down completely. And they perceive it not only as a political restructuring in line with the vision of the new government, but as an intimidation of the now political opposition. How can you reconcile these two opposing perspectives that appear to be quite polarizing the country?
Yeah, that's a great question. So starting from Anne Applebaum, and that's one of the problem on the conservatives in Poland, but I think also in other smaller countries. There are people that are connected internationally, that are creating narratives, right? And Anne Applebaum, I'm not saying her history books are great about, for example, Gulag, and I think she's a great thinker and an intellectual. But when it came to law and justice government, for a long time, she played this role, was saying, well, this is a dictatorship. I will explain it to you what it is. And her explanation was often a rugged simplification. For example, in her book, The Twilight of Democracy, that she wrote, I think, in 2018, she explained the fact that people were voting for law and justice, and some of the intellectuals were supporting law and justice. She supported it with a basically biased and, I think, discredited right now, dysfunctional psychological theory of authoritarian personality, right? Theodor Adorno was created. So basically, those people are somehow a little bit sick, right? They want authoritarian rule. They believe in traditional values, and the problem with that, if you think that the other side is so evil, many journalists in Poland from the liberal side are saying, well, it wasn't certainly to a large extent 100% lawful. But if you're dealing with barbarians, sometimes you have to breach some of the rules, right? And they're saying everything will go back to normal. But for me, the problem is any journalist who is pointed to his workstation by a police officer saying, that is where you will stand and say some words to the camera, because that was the issue there in Polish media, has to think himself, am I representing really a real free media that will be plural? Is this the way that... So my imagination, idealistic imagination, if somebody would say BBC is propaganda, right? We have to change that. They are too one-sided. You will have somebody who would have a plan how to change that. There will be a verification process. Some people will say, well, actually, those journalists are fine. Those journalists are too biased. We have to do something with them. We will change the programming and stuff like that. But throughout this whole process, the BBC would be broadcasting, because that would be a shock for BBC to stop broadcasting. For example, you know, some of the analysts say the web page of TVP Info was taken down, and it would lose for a couple of days is down, and will be for many days. It will lose its positioning on Google. So this is Polish public company that will lose money because of those actions, right? So I have a, as far as I understand, people who were saying this was too one-sided, this was propaganda. Okay, that's fine. You won the election, you have full right to do to change public media, because that's the Polish law. But sometimes you have to wait. Sometimes some things are impossible. And they said, no, we don't believe that. We believe everything is possible if you have power. Just to give you one example, after the US Supreme Court made a decision that Roe v. Wade is no longer in power, there was a huge hysteria, right? Something similar to Law and Justice winning the election in 2015, I would say. And some people were even saying, well, we'll have to park the Supreme Court. We'll have to put our judges there, right? So they can overturn the ruling once again. But some smart people said, well, if we do that, we maybe will have a favorable to us and to our worldview decision, but we can lose the prestige and the respect of the Supreme Court for a really, really long time. And that would be a damaging not only to this one decision about abortion, but it will be damaging to the US constitutional system as a whole. So that's the problem. If you can just sign or vote a resolution in the parliament and say, this is our will and anything can happen, how those new journalists who will work in TVP will know that, for example, after one broadcast of the news program, somebody will say, well, let's make a resolution in the parliament and let's say all of the people that were working on that program are sacked because we don't like that, right? So that, you know, if you don't respect the checks and balances, which we have to be fair, I don't want to put, you know, create a one-sided view, although as I said before, I'm a conservative. Law and Justice, yes, they overcame, they broke some of the checks and balances that were in the Polish system, which wasn't ideal anyway in the past, but they did that, so that's fair. But the ruling coalition now says, because they didn't respect the letter of the law, we are working to better the situations, to mend the situations, to restate the rule of law, and that's why we have to break the law, which is, I think, well, that doesn't make too much of a sense, right?
So, I mean, it sounds to me like this sort of very haphazard approach, which, by the way, again, appears very populist in its own right, very authoritarian in its spirit, ironically, after all the accusations leveled at the Law and Justice Party. I mean, it sounds to me that there's no effort to reconcile with the audiences to come to some sort of a conclusion how they could still have a voice in the future. I think this is very likely to put the TVP viewers and followers in a very paranoid mindset that they are once again being isolated, that things are being taken away from them by force, and they're left with no recourse. So that creates a dangerous polarization inside the country, and not to mention unclear repercussions for future elections. However, there's another element to this, which is all of this happened right before Christmas.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to figure out whether this is just, where is the rush? Why was this necessary to do this right before the holidays, which are very important for a very significant number of people? They're A, left without programming, B, feel like they're being attacked, and C, people lose jobs right before a major holiday. So that in itself is not So why was it necessary to do that in terms of timing in that particular manner? Is it a message or is it just incompetence?
Yeah, it's a great question because, that worries me really. Because, for example, right now, I'm not at my current residence. I live in Warsaw, but I came north to the Gdańsk city that I was raised and lived for a really, really long time working in media. I went to the capital, but every year I come at least for a week here to see my parents, my girlfriend's parents, and everybody, and have a holiday, a Christmas, right? Like, as we call it. Many Polish people are still, majority of Poles. And one of the topics in popular culture, and even I'm as a journalist, I'm always saying, if you meet your family, don't ask anybody who vote for who. Just talk about other stuff than politics, because family is more important than politics ever will be for you as common citizens, right? Yeah, and they did something contrary to that, because now many people, for example, there are demonstrations before TVP from the right wing politicians, and people are called to protest the takeover of the public media by the current ruling coalition. I think the tables on Christmas will have many fraught discussions, and families will be talking about that. And yes, and I agree with you. I don't know if it was so. First of all, if the propaganda was so hurtful to you, why did you won the election, right? And if you already won the election, wouldn't you be able to suffer through one more week of propaganda, right? And let's be clear, most of the people wouldn't watch things about politics during the holidays. They would watch Kevin Alone Home, which is the cultural symbol of Christmas in Poland. Every day, in the first day of Christmas, there's always Kevin Home Alone, and there are people who feel I watched it 27 times or something like that. So yes, they did that before Christmas. I think they wanted to show that they are powerful. They also wanted to put the other side of the political spectrum on the radical end of that spectrum. Because if you hear right-wing voices in Poland, what they did is another martial law. We have to fight. We have to protest. We have to be strong. And I make similarities with, for example, Donald Trump was in a unknown place for a long time after 2020 elections, and what strengthened his position was all those court cases of left wing, promoted by left wing media and left wing judges also, or left wing prosecutors, and they made him the strong candidate in the Republican Party. But what they gained with that, I think, is also the knowledge that the radical, the paranoid, the fighting spirit of the right will be easier for them to criticize, because they will say, look how dangerous, look how paranoid they are. So when I talk to the right-wing conservative intellectuals, I will say, yes, I understand there is a need to defend core values and there is a need to fight, but we also have to think. We cannot be they cannot determine our stance in this. And I think they wanted to do that to a large extent, to do something so aggressive, so outrageous, to send police. They even sent some civilians, unknown at this point, guys. One of those guys pushed a lady that is a member of the parliament, and she had, I think, some contusion to her arm. I don't know how serious, but that happened yesterday. Police finally, after some time, took the guy and arrested the guy. But there were certain elements of gangsterism and showing, look, you can cry, you can protest, you can say it is unlawful, but look at us, we have the power. And you have to shut up, this is a brutal truth about politics. Sometimes people enjoy watching their opponents suffer, and this is one of the motivations. I think.
Well, that seems to me strange, because it runs so contrary to this polite, civil, elitist air that that Brussels seems to. I mean, the whole point of Tusk was coming to power was exactly to go back to that particular spirit of not having all that optics of brutality and to do business as usual in this very polite, acceptable manner. So the
Yeah,
fact that they are leaving, that they are actually doing more of what they accuse the other side of doing, the irony of that to me is very, very clear. I understand why they want to do this. I understand what they're trying to do, but the tactics that they're accomplishing seem to be exposing that their motivations and their path and the accusations against the other side were not necessarily always in good faith.
yeah.
That's what strikes me about the execution of all of this.
I mean, yeah, the most frustrating part of the Polish politics debate is the hypocrisy that the both sides are accusing each other of. So, for example, Law and Justice, when they were doing the judiciary reform, there were protests and people were screaming "Konstytucja," which means in Polish "constitution." Constitution. You have to respect the constitution. And of course, there were discussions about interpretations. The US has the same discussions, for example, with Article 3rd of the 14th Amendment right now with Donald Trump. So you know the nature of those discussions, the law, judiciary discussions. But now some of the Law and Justice people are screaming Constitution, and the people on the other side, look, you are hypocrites. When the Tusk and his party was in the opposition, they were going to Brussels and they were saying democracy in Poland is in danger. You have to do something. We will give you data. And now they are laughing that Tusk, some of the Law and Justice politicians were talking to Vera Jourova, one of the commissioners of the European Commission, and saying something bad is happening. But just to be clear with you, I'm a conservative, and as I said, but I don't believe the ranking system in the world, if something is authoritarian or if something is dictatorial, is fair. The Brussels elites always said that Donald Tusk will bring back democracy and the rule of law, but not if they looked at his real record of his government before, of all those things, for example, he did with Russia, but also there was a famous situation where journalists from a weekly Wprost published tapes from a restaurant when the politicians of Civic Platform were talking with each other. They published the records, and Tusk sent investigators to the Wprost that were forcefully trying to yank the laptop of the journalist from his hands, which is, protect, I don't know if anybody would say that is the image, that the rule of law where the sources of journalists are protected, where things like due process are protected. That is the image that we will find in a republic that respects that. So the vision, in the best case scenario, the vision of Tusk, of the Brussels, was idealistic, right? They thought, well, he's a civic platform, it's democracy, they say the right things. But in the worst case scenario, it's just he's their friend. He was working there for a really, really long time. He made relationships, and his party is the part of the biggest fraction, because the European Parliament, I don't know if our viewers know that, but the European Parliament has fractions that compress many parties from different countries. And the biggest fraction is, so the biggest pan-European party in the European Parliament is the EPP, European People's Party. And it was always, most of the commissioners are connected to European People's Party. Most of the important administrators of the European Union are always connected to European People's Party, because Angela Merkel also was part of the European People's Party. And Tusk is also part of that party. So, for people that want Europe to run smoothly, they want somebody in Poland, which is the biggest country on the eastern flank on Europe, usually I think the thinking of the EU commissioner is that if you will take care of Poland, Lithuania, Estonia, even Slovakia or Slovenia won't oppose us because they're too small to do that, right? So for them, it's a key to have somebody that will be loyal and somebody that will say okay to all their projects. And maybe that's better for Poland. It's not for me to say. We will judge that in the long term. But just to once more stress my main point, the world cannot work on a really abstract norms like rule of law when only one side of the political spectrum is judged on those norms. Because when you look, well, it's brutal, and many people say, if you thought it will be different, you are naive. Well, I'm not naive, so I didn't respect that after yesterday we'll have European commissioners saying we condemn what happened in Poland. We accept the fact that public media have to change, but you have to do it differently. US ambassador in Poland didn't say anything, as far as I know, up to this point about what happened. So yeah, there are politicians in the world that have a larger flexibility given to them when it comes to fixing things like that.
Well, obviously, we see the failure of outcome-based politics rather than process-based respect for due process, for institutional process in carrying out. It ends up affecting all sides and negatively. But going forward, first of all, what further measures do you expect to see from Tusk's party? Do you expect this to be more or less the end of the matter? They made their move. They sent a signal. Are they going to stop, and will the rest of the things carry on fairly, normally, or do you expect, an escalation of some sort? And on the other hand, what do you think Law and Justice and other in their coalition to actually do, and what do you think they should be doing instead of whatever they're doing now or did in the past?
Yeah. Those are some hard questions. So first of all, when it comes to, so my prediction would be, there was a method presented on how they dealt with TVP. Let's try to simplify this method. The problem, let's imagine that we are a legislator or a prime minister from the ruling coalition right now, and we want to change Poland. We want to reverse all the changes that PiS put in place. The problem is PiS put in place reforms that were legislated by Polish parliament and were accepted by Polish president. So they are law. Right now, the Civic Platform and the coalition have the majority in the parliament, so they can legislate, but they worry that President Duda, that is connected to this Law and Justice camp, will not sign their legislation. So he will stop the process. So what they did with TVP, they didn't vote for legislation. They, as we said before, they did a resolution, which is like, this is our opinion, right? So the thing that they can do with all those different judiciary bodies, they can do something similar. They will do a resolution that will say the laws, we think the laws that PiS have legislated are unconstitutional. And there is, sorry, it's really complex, I know, but the one thing PiS also, or Law and Justice, had changed the Polish Constitutional Tribunal. In normal situation, when somebody in parliament would say this law is unconstitutional, there would be a simple path to Constitutional Tribunal, to the judges or justices that serve there, and they would say we agree or we disagree. They would give their opinion, and that would be the law. Right now, the Civic Platform can say we think it's unconstitutional, and we also think the current tribunal is unconstitutional. So you are faced with a really dangerous situation when the ruling party can say, because they put in place all those reforms, everything will go. So they can, for example, say, this is our resolution saying that the highest court in Poland, or high court in Poland, or the Supreme Court in Poland, although it has a different function than the Supreme Court in the US. The Supreme Court in Poland, in its current state, is unconstitutional. And this is our resolution. And what happens then? Well, we saw what happened in TVP. You, for example, say, we, in our resolution, we give to the Minister, for example, of Justice, we give the power to nominate new judges to the Supreme Court. And there will be, again, the same problem. Some people, some judges that are already in the Supreme Court, so we say, well, we don't accept your resolution. And maybe police will be called and people will say, you have to leave your office and some new. This is, of course, my hypothetical prediction. Mm-hmm. Other scenario, which would be more, I would say, mild, I would say a mild scenario would say they will stop at some point. Because, you know, Tusk, as I said before, he was a guy who believed that we are safe, we have to do something of a post-politics, we will, yeah, you know, he wasn't really an active ruler before. Mm-hmm. So the question is, will he return to his nature at some point and they will just be happy with all the splendor of the power after they take away the TVP? Or will they try to make more changes in Poland? Of course, the overall long-term consequence is, as I said, worrisome to everybody, should be worrisome to everybody. You know, it's like this case when Mitch McConnell said to, I think, Barack Obama when the filibuster was taken away from Supreme Court justices' nomination in the Senate. In some time, we will use the mechanism that you used against you, and you will find out what happens, right? When you take away checks and balances. So the same thing, but maybe on a larger scale, because Poland is still a very young democracy, a very young republic. That is, you know, we have a constitution, but it was in 1997. Many people. It's not the same as in US where a constitution is a sanctity, right? So we have to be very careful, especially in a world like this. So I'm really curious what they will do. Of course, there is and just to answer the second part, what the right should do in Poland, what Law and Justice should do. Well, I think they should focus on really important things. And those things are, for example, there is a plan to build a big central airport in Poland. That is a logistic infrastructure investment that they've made, and they should, and during the elections, the civic platform said, we are rather for building that, but we will see. Poland has to build nuclear plants to be energetically safe, especially with Russia on our borders. Poland has to reform its military for the military to be ready for the war. So I think the conservatives have to accept the fact that we lost the election, and as long as they go by the rule of law, they have the right to change the country according to their vision, and sometimes we can't do anything about it. But at the same time, we should concentrate on those crucial long-term issues that will create a safe Poland, not only for conservatives and liberals, but for everybody. And I think this will be also, the slogan of being a constructive opposition is always overused in world politics and never comes to light. But I think in difficult times, you need to be a constructive opposition sometimes.
So I have two last questions, one negative and one positive, to end on a better note for the end of the year. The negative question is, you referenced the former intelligence officer, now Minister of Culture, taking over the restructuring of TVP. To what extent do you believe there is a plan to weaponize information not only in favor of the ruling party, which is normal, but actually in more kind of more direct security-oriented approach, meaning not just simply, something to be expected to have someone a pro-ruling party bias, but something that is actually more in line with hidden security-oriented way information is controlled.
Yeah. So Bartłomiej Sienkiewicz, who you're talking about, the colonel of the EOP Special Services, so Secret Services. When he was a minister, I think back then he was the minister in the previous Tusk government. He was the minister of internal affairs, I think. I might be wrong, either internal affairs or justice. But on those tapes that we talked about, the tapes that led to investigators, taking away the laptop of the journalist, on those tapes, he told a story about the March of Independence. In Poland, every 11th of November, especially during the rule of Platforma, patriotic and some of them nationalistic, yes, people were marching to celebrate Poland's independence. And there were, it was the people like, also football supporters, for example, young people generally. And during one of those marches, there was an incident where in the vicinity of Russian embassy, that is quite large in Warsaw still, what is warder like a kiosk, right? Like a place where the guard is sitting, small, was burnt down, right? And it was a huge scandal back then, and people were saying, well, it will damage our relationship with Russia. But everybody was blaming the right-wing nationalistic members of the march and supporters of that cause. And what Sienkiewicz said on the tape, somebody said about Sienkiewicz that he taught police officers or different agencies that are responsible for security in Poland. Well, he basically taught them that he calls them and they go and they burn down the kiosk of the guard, right? So I'm not maybe doing the greatest of a translation here live, but what that said is that the whole event was ordered by Mr. Sienkiewicz. That's the whole thing. So whether that will replay itself, I would just say this: whatever is the danger, I would be much more sure that, for example, journalists will cover that if the media sphere in Poland won't be dominated by one side. And this side taking over TVP will going back to media sphere of pre-2015. Right, where things like, for example, the Independence March were covered like, look at all those nationalists and pretty much fascists. They have psychological problems, and which this was the way of presenting the events, and many things could be swept under the rug. I hope it won't come to that, and I hope that, as I say, I'm not decided on the relationship of Tusk, of people like Sikorski, Radek Sikorski, who we talked about, the new foreign minister and former foreign minister, who, for example, had this famous tweet after the blowing up of the Nord Stream 2. I think you heard it. So he posted on Twitter a photo of this gas blowing up to the surface of the sea with a short comment: "Thank you, USA." And as you remember, probably the Russian ambassador to the UN was holding on the General Assembly, or whatever is the body in the UN, but was holding to the cameras a printout of the tweet of Radek Sikorski saying, everybody is saying Russia did that, but look who did it. Radek Sikorski says that, right? So again, you can have a optimistic interpretation of that, and you can have a pessimistic interpretation of that. Optimistic would be, he is a little bit crazy, he got carried away, he wrote something that he didn't check with everybody, but those are the worries, right? Sikorski was also famous, just to finish on that, to the Maidan protesters when there was during Maidan in 2014, when there was this stage where there was a deal negotiated before Yanukovych actually ran away, and the deal had to be thrown out because there was nobody to take the deal then. But he was talking to the protesters and to the politicians from the Ukrainian opposition, just accept it because they will shoot you to death or something like that, right? They will kill you all. You will die in blood. So those people don't have the greatest record, but there are media that will cover for them. I think that's a problem.
So finally, to end on a less, it's a sober situation. It's a sober discussion, and certainly there are a lot of challenges ahead for the country and for everyone concerned with what's going on. But I want to end on a positive note, and that is when I visited Gdansk in September of this year. I had an occasion to do that, and I was enchanted with the city. And one thing struck me from having long, in-depth conversations walking around the city with many different people, I thought that it could be an ideal environment for some sort of a classical liberal approach, whether in the media or politics or both, to emerge compared to some other places. And that could be a framework for sort of getting past the hyper-populism, hyper-partisanship, and sort of bringing together reasonable people away from the age, so to speak. To what extent do you think that's possible, likely in the near future, for a city with that history and environment to kind of foster a new form of discourse and more promising younger generations of politicians and journalists who might be looking towards other examples to enrich the political environment?
Well, first of all, I love your optimism, and I love Gdańsk because that's my home city. I lived here till I was 34 years old when I moved to Warsaw. So for most of my life. But just a small I have to do that. Gdańsk is a great city. We have Solidarność here, and the start of Polish protests, the Stocznia, which is the Gdańsk shipyard, is a still symbolic historical place. And I was actually raised quite close to the Stocznia, and I was a little child during the communist times, but all my parents always told me stories about that. So this is a great tradition, but also the reality is Gdańsk politically is the stronghold of the civic platform. Donald Tusk is from Sopot, which is just a neighboring city, even like the same city in some sense. But I would say in general terms, whether it will be from Gdańsk, whether it will be from some intellectual society, whatever direct, I think we need that. The problem of that is that there will always be, for example, Szymon Hołownia, who won, I think 14% of the general vote. He says the third way, which is itself a symbolic way. There is a polarization between Tusk world and Kaczynski world. I am the third way. The problem of him is that he is in a coalition with Donald Tusk. And let me give you, I think we are talking for such a long time that I don't remember what I already said, but Hołownia actually, after they make a resolution about TVP, he said, we won't cut away the electricity, it's just a resolution. And they did exactly that. They cut away not the electricity, but the signal of the TVP. So that is, but I feel like the nation and all the nations in the West are in need of a politics that will be more sensible, but also more direct and more addressing their problems, right? Politicians cannot be either idealistic and out of space, but also they cannot be just working by algorithms of social media. Whatever gives me the most likes, I will say that, because I think there are many politicians like that right now, which is a danger of it in itself. But so I think I would say the societies, for example, there was a poll that said 6 out of 10 Americans feel they are dissatisfied with the choice that they will have in the presidential election in 2024. They would like a third candidate, right? So if 60% say we are dissatisfied like that, it means that the majority are not tribal warriors in the partisanship war, right?
Mhm.
They want something more concrete. They want something practical. And the practical problem with that, just to finish, I shouldn't finish on a problem. So I think the people have the need, and I think at some point the wave of partisanship and the wave of creating apocalyptic narratives, if they will take
Mhm.
power, Poland will end. If they will take power, Poland will end. People will say, okay, maybe we can work on something more in the middle way, right? So if you ask me if I see something that brings this hope, well, not exactly right now. But I think that the system that we're living in cannot work forever. And when we seen in history times where things were changing really fast, and I hope the changes will be for the better. So that's the optimist in me saying.
Well, thank you so much for your time and for this really fascinating look inside these very controversial events. I think the understanding of what is going on and trying to at least beginning to see the balance and the different interests involved in how they align and why what is happening is at least the beginning of trying to solve the problem. Of course, it's going to be a very long and complicated process, but at the very least, I think conversations such as this one, away from hysteria and towards a more solution-oriented and more understanding approach, I think that's at least one approach that is more likely to work towards this. And for those watching us, I hope everyone has had a wonderful Christmas. This was the final edition of the Washington Outsider Report for the year, and I hope everyone enjoys a wonderful new year and a much better 2024 than this year has been for many of us. And we'll see you on the other side. Thank you for joining us and have a great night.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me to talk about Poland. I always love to do that. Thank you.